Good morning, Mr. Ruby's class, and welcome to this assignment. This is a quick video to give you an overview of this assignment and what you're expected to do on it. It's about natural selection. There's a reading and chart. The chart below lists examples of adaptations of different organisms. For each example, state whether the adaptation is a result of natural selection or artificial selection. Describe at least one advantage of the adaptation. So if we go through here, we look at apples with large sweet fruit. Is that natural selection or selective breeding? And the advantages of the adaptation. Cacti with sharp spines. You decide natural selection or selective breeding and the advantages of the adaptation. Bats that can fly. Natural selective or selective breeding. Advantages of the adaptation. Crabs that can hide. Tomato plants that can grow in salty environments. So in this column, you decide what the adaptation is an advantage. And over here, where my cursor is, if you think it's natural selection or selective breeding. Now, how do you figure this out? You click on the reading link right here. I'm going to open this up. And it looks like this. Let's go over this reading together right now. Natural selection. What do you know about evolution? Evolution is a population's change of inherited traits over time. One of the most common examples of evolution is an ape walking and evolving an animal that stands in an upright position. One mechanism of evolution is natural selection. Natural selection is a popular theory proposed by Charles Darwin, which suggests that species change over time because organisms with traits well suited to their environment have greater success in surviving and reproducing. Over here, a picture of Charles Darwin. His theory of evolution by natural selection changed the way we understood the diversity of life. Natural selection theory that organisms with traits that are well suited to their environment survive and reproduce more successfully. Scrolling down now. Factors that contribute to natural selection. Here are 3 factors. Genetic variation. There are differences among individuals within the same species. Traits that are more favorable to a species are more likely to be passed on from one generation to generation, increasing the species' chances of survival. Look at the picture over here of the giraffe. The giraffe with a longer neck can reach more food up high in the trees that's available. It can reach down to food and up higher to food, therefore more likely to have the nourishment and food to eat, and more likely to pass that trait on to its little baby giraffes. Overproduction is another term. If a species produces more offspring than the environment can support, many of the offspring will not survive into adulthood. So let's look at our giraffe example again. If we have one giraffe in one tree, everything's okay. If we had 40 giraffes in one tree, then not every giraffe will get enough to eat. Overproduction of a species. Competition. Since resources such as food, water, and space are limited, offspring must compete for the resources for survival. Individuals with a trait that gives them a competitive advantage are more likely to reproduce. So, what's got a competitive advantage? The faster giraffe that doesn't get eaten, the giraffe with the longest neck that can eat more food, and the prettiest giraffe, of course. Scrolling down to the next page. Adaptation. An adaptation is an inherited trait that improves the survival of a species. For example, The giraffe underwent mutations that caused some offspring to have longer necks. The giraffe with longer necks ultimately had a better rate of survival because they could stretch their necks to reach the leaves on tall trees. Over time, more and more giraffes inherited the longer necks, increasing the survival of the species. Adaptation, an inherited trait that improves the species of survival of a species. How does a species change over time? An environment meets the needs of the organism that live there. Environments are always changing. Adaptations can be behavioral traits that are inherited over generations, as well as physical traits. Think about the seasons. It's warm in the summer and cold in the winter. Over here on the side with the two cardinals, many birds migrate in the winter. Organisms must find a way to deal with these changes. Some plants lose their leaves and stop growing when it's cold. Some animals grow thick fur coats. Animals like birds migrate to warmer areas to make it easier to find food during the winter season. Plants also have adaptations that help them survive. For example, water lilies have large, thin leaves. The structure of the leaves helps water lilies float so they can get enough sunlight for photosynthesis. Floating is beneficial because the leaves can produce more food. More food produces more seeds, and naturally the trait passed on to the next generation. There you go, some pictures of some water lilies right here. You wonder what those look like. On the sidebar, genetic variation, differences in physical traits as well as behavioral traits among individuals. Competition, contest between individual species for resources and space. Natural selection continues. Look out! Galapagos finches natural selection. Prime example of adaptations are seen in the Galapagos medium ground finches. A study in the 1970s revealed that variation in beak size changed over time. During times of drought, finches with large beaks had higher survival rate because they were able to eat the seeds available during the drought that those with smaller beaks had a hard time eating. Therefore, the generation of finches after the drought had more birds with larger beaks. After the drought, more seeds were available for the finches with smaller beaks. The large beak was no longer a beneficial trait, so the number of birds with larger beaks stopped increasing. What do you think? Artificial selection is another mechanism by which evolution can occur. Artificial selection is the intentional breeding of plants or animals to produce desirable traits. It can increase diversity by creating new variants and also decrease diversity by eliminating other variants. Artificial selection is also called selective breeding. Selective breeding of domestic animals, thoroughbred horses, meats we eat such as cows, pigs, and chickens. Common examples of artificial selection include cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, collard, and kale, which are all members of the same species, Brachycia achrea. These common vegetables were cultivated from the wild mustard plant. There is a downside to artificial selection because it removes genetic variations from a species, making it susceptible to disease and environmental changes. And that's the end of our reading. And to review some of the pictures here, here's some dogs. A lot of artificial selection going on there, selective breeding to get the breeds of dogs. And then we also have the cabbages. Again, the birds. We'll scroll back up to the top. So that was our reading. And so if we go back over here to our chart, natural selection versus selective breeding. Now, apples with large sweet fruit, do you think it would be natural selective or selective breeding? You decide. And the advantages of that adaptation. Well, I hope this video was helpful. And you'll be getting the link placed right in here underneath the reading link when the video is processed. All right. Thank you so much. Mr. Ruby out.